super excited to be here. That's great. I'll give a quick intro. I lead the product strategy, AI product strategy and operations delivery for layer 6 at TD. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ollie. I'm Jesse Cresswell. I'm a senior machine learning scientist at Layer 6 AI, which is the machine learning research lab within TD Bank. And I head up all projects for trustworthy AI, which I hope we'll get a chance to discuss today.
We will for sure. So this is supposed to be interactive, so I'm going to go through a little bit of content, ask questions, but hopefully provoke some discussion with the audience. So please interrupt, please speak up. I think, can I go, there we are, there's our introduction. So yeah, I've got 4 slides. I'm not gonna just stand here and read through them, but I thought I can tee up some of the concepts, and as I go through, promise the slides actually start to look better. But just kind of wanted to set up AI overall. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the lending journey, but AI has been evolving for decades, regardless of the hype cycle that we're in right now. I think AI has been evolving, and lending, of course, has been evolving with it. And our use of AI in lending has evolved, but I think there's still some big barriers that we're looking to overcome, which is why we kind of want to get into some of the key themes today. So if we think about the evolution of AI over time, and just how we used to think about machine-based learning and what was available to us before, a lot of these practices are still kind of inherent in all of the things we do in lending. And so what we want to talk about today is how we can push some of those limits. So if we think about the way that we've done things for a long time, it's rules-based programming, right? You need a lot of human-specified knowledge to do those things. So you can think about rules systems, needs data. We probably didn't have a lot of data, and then it spits out, traditional programming spits out some sort of answers. And of course, where we are now is something way more evolved, but we're not using the way more evolved stuff yet in the credit life cycle. But we've got machine learning. We all understand a bit about that. We take data, we take observations from the machine, and we spit out some sort of rules. So maybe I think we're all kind of familiar with the opportunities for AI across the credit life cycle. I listed some stuff here because this is, we both work for TD Bank, so there's a number of solutions that we've built over the years. I think if you're in a fintech, this might look a little different, but generally speaking, the credit life cycle, I think, is a fairly well-worn life cycle, and we understand how to apply AI to it. Whether or not we're doing that is another story. So, when we first started using AI in the credit life cycle, it was a lot of batch, a lot of, like collections models were our first ones. As we've evolved over time, we've evolved from batch to API. Recently, we've evolved into pre-approvals and adjudication, but still there's a lot of barriers. Maybe with that, I'm going to try and kick off. Hopefully you guys are generating some great questions for us. Maybe I can ask Jesse a question to kick us off. What would you say are some of the big common misconceptions of AI and using AI?
Well, one of the most basic misconceptions that I do see quite often is this notion that AI models are constantly changing. The models themselves are changing. This is a misconception, and in reality, almost all the models that are deployed in real-world use cases, especially at banks, are static models. The models are fixed. They're not learning in an online fashion. There's a lot of risks that come along with models that are learning live. You can never guarantee that they won't wander off in some direction that you don't want. So it's much more common for us and others that I've seen to build fixed models on fixed data sets that are then deployed into production and run for the long term. That allows us to evaluate and validate the models at one point in time, know that they're working properly, and then have the confidence to use them going forward.
Awesome, thanks. Any other misconceptions out there? Yeah. For sure. For sure. So I'll start off and then I'll throw it to Jesse. So really you're looking for AI literacy to be able to drive conversations with people. And that's a great question because of course a lot of what we do in AI isn't really accessible. We've got, you know, machine learning scientists and engineers who've been doing it for years at a deep level, at a research level. But I do think that there's, you know, a lot available out there in terms of literacy, but it also depends on what you're thinking about. So if you think about like ethical AI in the governance space, it's probably a little different than, say, thinking about how, you know, the types of algorithms and things you can actually do with AI. I'm going to start by saying maybe for like a general survey, there's probably some accessible courses through Vector.
I was going to mention Vector Institute.
Yeah. In terms of like online courses, I don't know, so the Vector Institute is a really great resource for, you know, accessible information. I would highly recommend it. They have courses and boot camps for citizen AI users and laymen and business people, as well as like advanced researchers alike. So I'd say that's a really great place to start with. And they probably have a pretty good list of where you can go from there as well.
So Holly, what I would add to that, and I'm not affiliated with Vector Institute, but I collaborate with them, so it sounds like a plug, but they have more of an industry tilt. They're meant to be an industry research partnership, so you might find them having a better alignment with your needs.
Awesome. Hopefully that helps. Okay. I'm gonna keep moving because, like I said, I do want to get into some of the more exciting stuff. It's always fun to see your slides up on a big screen and where you kind of fell down a bit on the formatting. But anyway, I'm AI, maybe not Microsoft PowerPoint. I wanted to just kind of, you know, give a bit of an overview of what we're seeing in the AI space in general. So I craft a lot of strategy and forward-looking vision for the bank, but just generally and panels and whatnot. And there's a lot of questions around just how AI is changing, what's happening, where is it going, what are the big shifts. I think these 4 buckets capture the main themes that we're seeing a lot of talk around. So the AI factory of the future, when we talk about batch models and API models, like just how can you build and deploy a model, standardize the monitoring. You know, if we think about having any sort of on-demand decisioning, we would need to have a pretty robust infrastructure to do that. And of course, with the advancements now and cloud-based solutions, that's becoming possible. But I think we're still a little bit behind in being able to offer, at least in the big banks, the real-time decisions. But that AI factory of the future is what a lot of large organizations are working on, and fintechs. Emerging technology, of course, we all know about Gen AI and cloud. There's a lot of different types of Gen AI solutions, you know, knowledge management solutions using OpenAI for various activities, conversational experiences and whatnot. I'm sure we've all heard about that. And I think there's a paradigm shift as well, like it falls into the Gen AI bucket, but I think it's notable to pull it out and just say a couple things about it. So foundation models we've probably heard of. At TD, we're using a foundation model approach on tabular data. So it's sort of an evolution of the predictive models where, you know, you go in and you figure out your target variable and you build a model, and then you proliferate hundreds, potentially more of those models. A foundation model kind of shifts the paradigm to be able to build one big foundation model and then a number of head models. So it's kind of a one-to-many. And then trustworthy AI, which I won't say a lot about it because Jesse's actually an expert in that space and we will get to that. But I did want to kind of put these up there. Curious if anyone, or I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or anyone has anything they would add to the list. Did I miss anything that you're seeing? Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, yes, like a corporate level strategy, corporate governance of AI. Oh, I don't know if I fully understand, like, just in terms of how we're evolving the field of governance of AI in general. Of course. Yeah. So again, I'll start it and then maybe throw it over to Jesse. So some of what we've seen, I'll just by example, on the ground in delivering the new technologies like GenAI and foundation models is that a lot of the traditional structures and approaches we had for governance need to be evolved. So if you think about change management, GPT versions, we didn't really have processes in place for that. We don't have processes for monitoring, and how do you have monitoring that requires a human? So there's a lot of things that need to be thought through that we're thinking through. I'm sure everybody is. I would say at an enterprise level, what we're really trying to do now is think through some of our strategy around like ethical AI and trustworthy AI, and I think it's a really important area of research, but we're just starting to kind of put together a more cohesive narrative. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, given...
I'll add one thought. So you're likely familiar with the typical structure of our financial institutions where they have first line, second line, third line. First line being, let's say, model developers, second line being control partners, third line being audit. I'll just put one item out there for you to think on, and it's around the intersectionality of the different controls that need to be faced. So if you look at the second line, there might be controls around privacy, around legal aspects, around compliance, or the actual validation of models. Each of those lines typically thinks along their own buckets. But then look at what the first line is doing. As model developers, they need to simultaneously satisfy all those different controls. So you have one group of people who are looking along one single direction, facing another group of people who has to look simultaneously across all these different ideas. That can put the first line in a very difficult spot if there's ever conflicting requirements or even interacting requirements between the different second line groups. So I wonder if there's a way for us to shift governance, specifically around the second line, to be more holistically focused and consider the interactions and the intersectionality of these various controls, which are currently segregated and siloed.
Yeah, and actually one of the things that we're recently considering as we do some model work is just the idea of having an AI risk role, somebody dedicated to triaging and making decisions, because of course we have risks spread across a number of frameworks, like a model, like a compliance framework, a model risk management framework. But how do we actually look at AI risk holistically? We probably have to have somebody who can kind of pull in the right frameworks and policies and evolve that. So that's one thing we're looking at, and I think a lot of, from what I hear, at least from consultants, a lot of industry is looking at that.
Awesome. So along the governance kind of question was, how are you guys seeing currently and in the future for things like data residency, privacy? Because once it goes into a model, especially a cloud model, we have to keep our data on Canadian servers. How do you guys see that today and also evolving? How do we protect to ensure we're compliant?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, so I was going to frame up the session by saying I am not a risk expert. We're definitely SMEs on applying AI to lending, but I think in terms of like evolving the privacy space, we are going to talk a little bit about bias and privacy and trustworthy AI. That might give a little bit of our point of view at least on how that applies to some of the new and more advanced techniques that we're doing. I don't know that I would comment necessarily on where the regulations are going, not being the expert there, but I do think that we are facing a number of questions, challenges. Of course, we have robust programs, any bank would, but what's that going to look like once everything's on the cloud and once we've got a number of models using, like a foundation model will use vast amounts of data. So certainly that problem will blow up. I don't know if I have an answer for it though.
Well, the data residency aspect is interesting. Are we required to keep our customers' data in a certain geographic region? We're in Canada here, whereas cloud computing servers might be scattered across the globe. Maybe the most powerful nearby server is in the U.S. Eastern Seaboard for us here in Toronto, but that's a different jurisdiction. It could open you up to entirely different laws and regulations. So I do believe that most of the major cloud providers, like the big three cloud providers, do have the ability, they give you the ability to select which region you want your data to be siloed in. It might come at an additional cost, but it's usually fairly marginal. I've also noticed that the pace of advancements and offerings from these cloud platforms does differ by region. So US East might be one of the first to get the best models, the newest features, whereas one that's actually based in Canada might lag behind. The best thing to do there, I think, is just to reach out to your cloud provider, tell them that you're interested in these products, that you want to have the ability to make your data and your models reside in Canada, and put pressure on them to provide those services in a timely fashion.
I think open banking there's also going to be a lot of regulations that we haven't seen yet, just as that evolves as well, right?
A question. So one of the hot topics for 2024 was fraud. What type of AI models are in production or are being discussed today to kind of minimize the fraud that the lenders are seeing in the space?
Yeah, so fraud is obviously a big area. I will speak a little bit from my experience, and then maybe ask Jesse. We've actually scoped out a number of more advanced models. I think the big challenge, Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think the big challenge we've seen isn't necessarily in being able to build the models, it's in having the right data and the right data infrastructure. But I think there's actually a lot of techniques available where we can apply to fraud if we had the right data infrastructure.
Yeah, so one of the bigger challenges with fraud is that you need to act fast, right? A transaction comes in which you think is fraudulent. You might have literally milliseconds to make a decision on whether you're going to let that transaction go through with your rail provider, Visa, whoever else. So one thing that Holly was already touching on earlier was the difference between batch modeling and real-time modeling. Many of the typical credit applications you'll be looking at to build machine learning models at a bank can operate in batch. You can run them once a day or once a week or once a month. They're not running real-time. Real-time infrastructure is much more expensive to maintain. It's harder to engineer and build, but it's absolutely critical for most fraud applications. So the biggest challenges are actually on the technical and the engineering side here. I think the modeling can be done. We can get into technical details about how to model that, but it's actually more on the engineering side. There's no point in doing the modeling if you can't deploy it in a fashion that's going to give you, millisecond scale inference.
I want to make sure that we get into trustworthy AI because I think it kind of will bridge some of these questions. Maybe I can kick it off with a question before we get into that content. How concerned should we be about bias in AI, which is also something we hear about a lot?
Well, we absolutely need to be thinking about bias and fairness of the models that we deploy. But I don't know that it's the bias of the AI in those words. I feel like the bias mostly would come from your data. So when I work with algorithms, various AI and machine learning algorithms, it's not the algorithms themselves that are biased. Algorithms tend to propagate bias and sometimes exaggerate bias, but they don't generally create bias. If the data itself is unbiased, then the models should be unbiased as well. So it all comes back to the data. Is the data that you're using to build some model unbiased? Then the model is much less likely to be biased. Another thing that I'll point out on this topic is how we actually go about defining fairness in these cases. There's a very big difference between procedural fairness and substantive fairness. So it's like the difference between equality and equity. Procedural fairness means treating everybody the same way. That might not lead to fair outcomes, though. So that's what substantive fairness talks about. Are the actual outcomes achieved by different groups of people similar? So you need to pick the right mindset, and you need to look at your data to make sure it reflects the type of fairness you want to see in your models.
Awesome. Thanks. That's great. By show of hands, how many of the folks in the audience are familiar with trustworthy AI or have interacted with it, familiar? I see a few hands. So hopefully today is an interesting bit of content. So I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. So I didn't see many hands, which is great. So we can get into this and try to uncover a bit more about what trustworthy AI is. So trustworthy AI is not a single concept. It's a multifaceted framework for thinking about and characterizing the types of behaviors we want to see in our AI. It's about aligning AI with the characteristics that we think are responsible. Some of the factors that go into trustworthy AI are explainability. So explainability is the ability to explain what factors went into a model's decision and why we got particular answers out of our model. There's also fairness that I was just touching on. Are the processes unbiased? Are the outcomes unbiased for our models? That all comes back to data, as I was just saying. There's privacy. Do we understand what data is being used to train the models? Do we understand what data might be leaking into the models and what might be coming out of the models? This one in particular is extremely interesting now that we're getting into the world of generative AI, where our models are not just making predictions, but generating content. If the models have ingested private information, are they going to generate that data in the content that it's creating? Would that potentially create privacy risks for our customers or colleagues? Certainly there are risks there. And another one that I've listed there is robustness. Are we confident that our models are going to perform over time? Can we build ourselves to a place where we validate models at one point in time and then can use them for the long term, years at a time, knowing that their behavior is going to be consistent, with appropriate monitoring? Another aspect that I find very interesting and we've been investing a lot in recently is uncertainty quantification. This is a more technical one, but it's about how humans might be able to interact with AI and how confident we actually are in the decisions that are coming out of it. So models don't act like humans at all. If you and I are having a conversation and you ask me a question, if I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you that. I'll say, I don't know, right? Models don't do this. If you ask a model a question, it gives you a single answer every time, no matter what, even if it doesn't know what it's talking about, right? So we're thinking about how we can build models that actually communicate their uncertainty in a way much more similar to humans. And this is then beneficial for the interactions between our models and the humans who are using them on a day-to-day basis. So we at Layer 6 are not just model builders, we're a research lab as well. We've conducted research on these aspects, and in some peer-reviewed research released earlier this year, we've actually showed that when you give humans not just model predictions, but confidence from the model in how, in terms of what answers the model thinks are likely, that will actually improve a human's ability to make decisions. So let me put that into a more concrete setting for you. Let's say that a human makes a decision on their own for some task versus a human being given a single prediction from a model versus a human being given a model prediction along with its confidences. In that order, the performance of humans, the accuracy of human decisions will actually increase. It gets better and better the more information you provide them from the model. So in terms of implementing this in actual projects that you might see in a lending situation, what we've found very useful in our applications is to build models that learn when to defer to humans. So of course, we're operating at the scale of more than 10 million customers. So we do need to automate decisions. But there are some decisions that are so tough and so corner case that we don't want to leave it to our models, and we want the humans to make the final call. So what we can do is train models that automatically make decisions when they're confident, but when they are not confident, they know to defer that question to a human. And we can also provide the human, like an underwriter, with additional information from the model, insights that the model has generated, and explanations from the model of why it thinks one thing is more likely than the other. The outcomes of these kind of systems is that the models are more trustworthy because there's actually a human in the loop, and a human can think critically about those corner cases. We also think that this is one of the more important directions to be thinking about as we move towards new paradigms of generative AI and foundation models. So these emergent technologies come with emergent risks. Thinking about the models that we build in terms of trustworthy aspects from privacy, explainability, and so on helps us get ahead of those risks and manage them as they come up. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions from the audience that we can tackle together. I see one back here.
Would you provide some real-world examples of how you use AI and then how you built in sort of the principles of trustworthy AI?
Sure. So I think, actually, this is a good one for the next slide, if we can go forward. I have one more slide about that. So I think this is directly answering your question. So this is a schematic drawing of a typical lending model, let's say. So we want to build a model that looks at a loan application and says, are we going to approve or decline this loan application? So it's a very binary problem. Starting from the data, you can see at each point of the process where these aspects of trustworthy AI come in. So just looking along the middle, the pipeline for a typical model development would be, we go from data, we construct model inputs, that goes to the model that we've built, which makes a decision, and we return that to the customer as an accept reject. Well, when we're thinking about fairness, as I've been emphasizing, that comes from data set debiasing. So at the very earliest stage, you need to be thinking about fairness. Second, once you have models prepared that are actually going into that model, you're thinking about the privacy of those inputs. What information is actually being provided to the model? What's it basing its decision on? Are those the appropriate features and inputs? Is anything going to come out the other side of the model that we don't want to see? Anomaly detection, this is closely related to, or it's very applicable to fraud, for instance. This is identifying those cases where your model was not designed to function. If there's some strange data, some corner cases, we don't want to trust the model on those. It hasn't seen enough information to be reliable there. And so we want to break out those inputs and take them from an alternate path, maybe going to a human. Once we're talking about the actual model, we're thinking about the robustness of it. How have we built it in such a way that we know its behavior is going to be consistent? This can get into a very technical discussion and how you actually achieve that, but you want to be sure that the model's behavior is not going to shift over time. Come back to the very first thing I was saying about online learning of models versus static models. So online learning has much less robustness, for example. Once you actually have model decision, uncertainty quantification becomes very valuable, as I just went into depth about. And then finally, when the model decision is going back to a customer, are we able to explain in human terms why we've made that decision or why the model has suggested that decision? So is that a helpful walkthrough for you?
Yeah, but if you don't mind follow up, is this something you're doing today or is this theoretical, I guess?
No, it's absolutely put into practice. We follow these steps and think about these concepts every time we're building a model.
We actually launched last year our first production use case that's using Explain. So front lines are actually able to access that so-called why of a model returning something so they can have more targeted conversations. So it is very real.
I'm going to go to the back. It is a big step to go towards automated decisions. There's massive efficiencies to be gained doing that. We're from TD Bank. We have 14 million or so customers in Canada. There's no option for us but to automate. There's no way to maintain everything in a manual fashion. So we are pushed by necessity to automation, and that often means machine learning and AI. It's a gradual process, though. Everyone starts there. Everyone starts with that first application that's on a very small subset where we're just trying things out. This is extremely normal way to proceed and a very responsible way to proceed. I think we're experiencing the same thing as you now, but on Gen AI. So this new technology that's coming out, we're thinking about what are the safest ways to try out this technology that will provide meaningful impact, but allows us to control the risks. So for example, we would look at internally facing, colleague-facing generative AI applications before we roll out a customer-facing one. You might have seen news stories about other institutions that have gone the other direction and the funny anecdotes that come out of that. Do you have any other thoughts, Holly?
No, I think I was just going to mention that, yeah, sometimes out of necessity you have to automate, but we obviously also have to be working within guardrails. So we really take a test and learn approach, and that's what you're talking about. So yeah, that would be my words. I'm cognizant that we are hitting a little over time. We did start late. We talk a lot though too. So I think if anybody has any questions, you guys can maybe follow up with us offline. We need to wrap her up. Thank you so much. It was great to have you guys as an audience. Appreciate it. Thanks.